The galaxy had forgotten the people for 3,000 years. Their small blue world, Prime, sat at the edge of a dying nebula. The great powers of the Galactic Council had placed an energy barrier around their entire star system long ago. They had committed no crime. They had started no wars. Their only mistake was being weak when stronger species wanted their resources. The barrier was not meant to protect them. It was meant to erase them from history. Captain stood on the bridge of the human exploration vessel Endurance. She was a tall woman with gray streaks in her dark hair and eyes that had seen too many stars. Her crew of 200 had been mapping the outer regions of known space for 18 months. They were tired. They were far from Earth. But they were also the first humans to detect the strange energy readings coming from the dead nebula. Commander James studied the sensor data with a deep frown on his face. The readings made no sense. There was a massive artificial structure surrounding an entire solar system. Nothing like this existed in any human database. Nothing like this existed in the records the Galactic Council had shared with humanity either. Moved closer to the main screen, the barrier shimmered with an ugly purple light. It stretched across millions of kilometers of space. Whatever was inside could not get out. Whatever was outside could not get in. This was not protection. This was a prison. The communication officer, Lieutenant Sarah Wells, suddenly looked up from her station. Her face had gone pale. She had picked up a signal from inside the barrier. It was weak and old. The message had been repeating for centuries. The translation software worked quickly. The message was simple. It was heartbreaking. It said only this: "We are still here. We remember the stars. Please do not forget us." Felt something cold settle in her chest. She had joined the space program because she believed in exploration. She believed in discovery. She believed that the universe was full of wonders waiting to be found. But this was not a wonder. This was a crime. Someone had locked an entire species away and left them to die in the darkness. She turned to her crew. Every face on the bridge showed the same shock, the same anger, the same determination. Humans had a long and painful history with isolation and imprisonment. They knew what it meant to be forgotten. They knew what it meant to cry out for help and receive only silence. James spoke first. He said they should contact the Galactic Council. They should report this finding and let the proper authorities handle the situation. It was the safe choice. It was the smart choice. It was exactly what their training told them to do. Shook her head. The Galactic Council had existed for 10,000 years. If this barrier was real, if this prison was real, then the Council knew about it. They had chosen to do nothing. They had chosen to let an entire civilization vanish from memory. She made her decision. The Endurance would investigate. They would find a way through that barrier. They would make contact with whoever was still alive inside, and they would bring their story back to the galaxy, whether the Council wanted them to or not. The Endurance moved toward the barrier slowly. Every scanner was active. Every sensor was recording. Dr. Maria Santos, the chief science officer, worked without rest to understand the barrier's construction. It was old technology, she reported, very old, but it was also incredibly powerful. No single ship could break through. No weapon they carried could scratch it. But Maria was human, and humans had a gift for finding solutions where none seemed to exist. She noticed something strange about the barrier's design. It was built to keep things in. It was built to keep things out, but it was not built to handle something passing through at a specific frequency. The creators had left a flaw. Maybe it was intentional. Maybe it was a secret door for themselves. Either way, Maria found it. Ordered the ship to match the frequency. The Endurance shook violently as they passed through the barrier. Systems flickered. Lights dimmed. For one terrible moment, everyone thought they would die in that purple light. Then they were through. They had entered the forgotten system. Prime was beautiful. It was a world of silver oceans and green forests. Great cities rose from the land, but they were dark and quiet. They had survived. They had endured. but 3,000 years of isolation had broken something inside them. The first contact was difficult. They had stopped believing that anyone would ever come. They had stopped hopping. When the Endurance appeared in their sky, many thought it was a trick. Some thought it was a final attack from the Council. Others simply could not understand what they were seeing. Elder was the first to speak with the humans. She was ancient by her people's standards, with silver skin and eyes like deep pools of water. She had been a child when the barrier was raised. She still remembered the day the stars disappeared. Met her in a simple room in the capital city. There were no weapons. There were no guards, just two leaders trying to understand each other across a gulf of 3,000 years. Told the human captain everything. They had been a peaceful species. They had developed slowly. They had never wanted to conquer or expand. But their world sat above vast deposits of rare minerals. The Empire had wanted those minerals. They had refused to give them up. They had complained to the Galactic Council. They had claimed that they were dangerous. They had presented false evidence of weapons programs and aggressive intentions. The Council had not bothered to investigate. They were powerful. They were weak. The decision was easy. The barrier was raised in a single day. They watched as their sun was surrounded by purple fire. They watched as every ship that tried to escape was destroyed. They watched as the galaxy turned away and pretended they had never existed. For 3,000 years they had lived in their prison. Generations were born and died without ever seeing the true stars. Their technology stagnated. Their population declined. Their hope faded until it was barely a spark. But they never stopped sending that message. They never stopped believing that someone might hear them, someone might care. Felt tears on her cheeks as she listened. She was not ashamed of them. Some things deserved tears. She told about humanity. She told her about a species that had crawled out of caves and reached for the stars. She told her about wars and failures and terrible mistakes. But she also told her about resilience, about stubbornness, about the human refusal to accept that anything was truly impossible. Humanity had joined the Galactic Council only 50 years ago. They were newcomers. They were considered primitive by many of the older species. They had no great fleets. They had no ancient technology. But they had something that many of the elder races had forgotten. They had fire in their hearts. They had anger at injustice. They had the absolute certainty that what had been done to them was wrong. Made a promise to that day. She promised that humanity would not forget thee again. She promised that the barrier would fall. She promised that the species who had waited 3,000 years for rescue would finally be free. The journey back to human space took 4 months, pushed the Endurance to its limits. She broadcast her findings on every frequency. She sent messages to every human colony, every station, every ship. The story of the spread like fire. The Galactic Council demanded that humanity remain silent. They sent diplomatic messages warning of consequences. They threatened economic punishment and political isolation. Some of the older council species were furious that humans had dared to interfere in ancient matters. Humanity did not care. For the first time in 50 years, the scattered human colonies spoke with one voice. From Earth to the outer rim, from tiny mining stations to great orbital cities, the message was the same. They would be freed. The barrier would come down. And if the Galactic Council tried to stop them, they would learn why humanity had survived every challenge in their history. Ships gathered at the edge of the dead nebula. Not warships. Humanity did not have many of those, but they had exploration vessels, mining ships, cargo haulers, and personal craft. Thousands of ships crewed by millions of humans who refused to look away from injustice. The Council sent a fleet to stop them. The Empire sent their finest warships to protect their ancient crime. For a moment, it seemed like war was inevitable. But humanity had another gift. They had the ability to inspire others. Watching from across the galaxy, Younger species began to question the council's decisions. If they had been imprisoned, who else might be suffering in the darkness? What other secrets were the elder races hiding? The fleet hesitated. The council's representatives argued among themselves. And in that moment of uncertainty, human engineers did what they did best. They solved an impossible problem. Using Maria's research and 3 months of desperate work, they built a device that could collapse the barrier. It was not elegant, it was not pretty, but it worked. The barrier fell on a Tuesday, by Earth's calendar. The purple light flickered once, twice, and then vanished forever. The stars returned to the sky of Prime for the first time in 3,000 years. Elder stood in the central square of her city. Around her, her people looked up at the night sky and wept. They saw the distant lights of human ships. They saw the galaxy they had been stolen from. They saw hope reborn after centuries of darkness. The Galactic Council could not punish humanity without admitting their own guilt. The Empire could not attack without revealing their original crime. They were free, and the galaxy would never be quite the same. In the years that followed, humanity earned a new reputation among the stars. They were not the strongest species. They were not the oldest but they were stubborn. They were compassionate. And they would never, ever accept that some lives mattered less than others. They rebuilt slowly. Human engineers helped restore their technology. Human doctors worked with their healers. Human teachers shared knowledge that had been lost for two species, separated by vast distances and different biologies, found that they shared something important. They both knew what it meant to look up at the stars and dream of something better. Returned to Prime 5 years after the barrier fell. She was older now, her hair almost completely gray, but her eyes were still bright with purpose. Met her at the spaceport. The elder was frailer than before, but she was smiling. Behind her stood a crowd of young and old. They had gathered to honor the human captain who had heard their message when no one else would listen. Tried to say that she had only done what was right. She tried to explain that any decent person would have done the same. Stopped her with a gentle hand on her arm. The elder said that was exactly the point. Humanity believed that decency was common. They believed that compassion was natural. They believed that standing up for the forgotten was simply what people did. That belief, said, was humanity's greatest gift to the galaxy. As the two friends walked together through the silver streets of the capital, the stars shone down on a world that was no longer forgotten. The galaxy had tried to erase an entire species from history. They had almost succeeded. But then humanity found them. And humans, as the universe was slowly learning, simply refused to let good people suffer alone. That was the story of the liberation. That was the day humanity proved that sometimes the youngest species in the galaxy had the oldest and truest wisdom. Some things were worth fighting for, some people were worth remembering, and some prisons, no matter how ancient or powerful, were never meant to stand forever. The stars remembered the now, and they would never forget again.